Okay, welcome back to this lesson where we're continuing to talk about percentages and fractions. This lesson is a little bit of a bonus lesson for those of us who are finding fractions and percentages. We have a really good understanding of them so far, okay? There are going to be some word problems and some thinking challenges and those sorts of things. Now, if you are at a point where you think, yeah, I'm ready to be understanding fractions and percentages, that's really, really good. And I'm ready for a challenge related to them. If you are feeling like you're at a point where you are still not really sure what percentages are, and for example, if you have handed in some work this week and Miss Lobo or I have said to you, maybe you could go back to have another look at lesson 3 or have a look at lesson 4 again, for example, I would going to encourage you to do that rather than carrying on at this point. There's nothing new that's going to come up in this lesson. It's just some sort of challenges. Okay, so still watch this video. But if you're unsure, it would be a better use of your time to go back to lesson 1 or 3 from this week to make sure that you have a really secure understanding of what we're talking about. I'm going to let you be responsible and leave it up to you. So either you're going to have a go at this lesson or you're going to have a second go at lesson 1 or lesson 3 and let myself or Miss Lobo know if you are going to have another go at those. Okay, percentages and equivalent fractions. Some of these we are going to start to want to have memorized, okay? For example, we definitely want to know, because it's going to help us out a great deal. It's going to help us out a great deal that 1/10 is the same as 10%. And we are going to want to know that a half is equal to 50%. Now, what are the relationships with the decimals that we know as well? Well, we know that a half is 0.5, so 5/10 and no hundredths. And we know that a tenth is 0.1. We know that, so that was a half, wasn't it? That was a tenth. Now you can see that I'm putting that extra place value 0 in there. That doesn't change it to 0.50 or 0.10 or something like that. It's still 0.5, 0.1. This is going to help us understand these things. A quarter in 0.25, and a fifth being 0.2, no hundredths in that number, and 3/4 being 0.75. So we can see, can't we, the relationship between a half being equal to 0.5 and it being equal to 50%. And a quarter, for example, being equal to 0.25 and 25%. These are the relationships that you need to start identifying as we continue to talk about and play with percentages. As always, take a stop here if you are unsure of any of the star words and want to discuss them or look them up. We are going to have a think now about percentages. In your life, when you read the news or when you watch sports or when we are doing lessons in school, you might hear people talk about percentages. And you might hear something like this: 30% of the world's population is children. So what does that mean? Does that mean that there are 100 people in the world and that 30 of them are children? Is that what that means? Well, no, it doesn't. Because there are way more than 100 people in the world, aren't there? There are 420 people just at St. Stephen's School alone. So there are many billions, about 8 billion people in the world. So when we see a question like this, it might start to get us confused. You might say, well, Mr. Plummer's told us that percent means out of 100. So that means there's 100 people in the world and 30 of them are children. Now, that isn't quite what it means. What it means is if they're out of every 100, 30 of them are children. So if you split them into groups of 100 and those 100 equally represented the whole set, 30 of them would be children. Now, don't worry if that's a little bit confusing for now, because all I need you to understand is that when we're talking about percentages, it's just another way of us talking about how much of the whole. For example, if I said that 30% of the class were doing something, 30% of the class were, I don't know, supported Arsenal, for example, it doesn't mean that 30 children in the class support Arsenal. It's 30% of the 30 of you in the class, okay? So even though percent does mean out of 100, sometimes we use a percentage to talk about a set that's not out of 100, okay? And I'm going to go into a bit more detail about that now. So let's stay with this page. So, for example, what I am saying is that it's that many out of 100. So, for example, 30 out of 100 if there were 100 children in the class. So what we are talking about is another representation. So this is why sometimes it's useful for us to use percentages. Sometimes it's useful for us to use decimals. Sometimes it's useful for us to use fractions. Now, we've seen in the past that decimals are really useful to use when we're talking about units and measurements and things like that, because they're really easy to order, because we can just put them in place value. For example, it's a lot easier to order these numbers it's a lot easier for us to go, okay, well, this is the smallest because this one hasn't even got any tenths. And then that's the second smallest, 0.1, because that's got 1/10. And this one's got 2/10, so that's the next one. This one's got 5/10. So it's really easy for us to order decimals. That's why decimals are really useful. Fractions, it's less easy to order, especially when they all have different denominators. But it's really easy for us when we're talking about percentages of one whole, parts of one whole. For example, halves or quarters or eighths or even thirds and things like that. So that's what fractions are really useful for telling us parts of the whole. Percentages are useful for telling us amounts, and we're going to go into a little bit of detail in the following weeks about how we find, for example, 30% of 700 or 12% of 90. Or things like that, okay? We're going into that a little bit later on in the year. For now, all we want to do is get used to using this vocabulary about percentages, okay? So here is a statement. 76% of the world's population has electricity. That doesn't mean that 76 people in the world have electricity. Again, we know that isn't true. We know many more people than that in the world have access to electricity. They have, plug sockets and batteries and things. What this is telling us is that 76% of the world's population has electricity. So if we were to imagine that the world was 100 people, then we would say that 76% of them, which would be about this much, has electricity. So it's a lot of it's the majority. We know that 76%, well, that's close to 75%, which is 3/4, isn't it? So they're just different ways for us to visualize amounts of a whole set, okay? What other statements, though, could you generate about this fact? This is why percentages are useful. For example, if I know that 76% of the world's electricity population do have electricity, then I know that 24% don't have electricity. I know that because I'm thinking of the whole group as 100%. And I subtracted the 76, which gave me the 24%. There are many other statements you could come up with, but there's just an example of one of them. Here, you can see a map. Now, this map is the nationalities of people, of athletes who competed in the Rio Olympics. So you can see that 11% of them came from North America, of the athletes. That doesn't mean that there were 11 people from North America competing in the Olympics. Remember, these aren't numbers, these are percentages. So if there were 100, or out of every 100, 11 of them were from North America. Okay, so that's what we mean by 11% of the athletes. We can see again 11% were from South America, 43% from Europe, Africa 9%, Asia 20%, and Australasia 6%. What could you tell me about all of those all together? Well, hopefully, now you might want to do this and add this up and check, but hopefully they should all add up to 100%. Because what we're talking about is we're talking about out of every 100. So when we have percentages, they need to add up to 100. That could be something very simple, like 40% of people do have something and 60% of people don't have something. And how many people did I survey altogether who did or didn't have the thing? 100% altogether. Okay. What I'm going to do is show you your task. The task for this one is fairly... Oh, I've lost Google Classroom. The task for this one is fairly straightforward. Sorry, allow me to just find it. I don't know where it's disappeared to. It is just a set of questions about the map that I just showed you, okay? And there aren't a lot of questions at all. The questions start easily and get tricky. So if you are one of those people that wants to go back and revise other lessons, this might be a good one for you to have a go at maybe question 1 and 2, and then you can go back and do your revision and just let me and Miss Lobo know that that is what you're doing. Obviously, don't just do 1 and 2 and then finish and think, oh, I'm done for the week now, as it's Friday. So leaving it up to you to be responsible to pick how much of these tasks you want to do. There are only 5 questions there, and then the rest of your time revising other things from this week. Hope that all makes sense, and over to you.